So first of all, what is sugar? So the food industry will tell you a calorie is a calorie, a sugar is a sugar. They'll also tell you a protein is a protein, a fat is a fat, a fiber is a fiber. Nothing could be further from the truth. Different food components, different biochemicals that you put in your body have different effects. Nowhere is this more obvious than when it comes to this concept of sugar. Now, sugar means glucose, fructose, galactose. Those are all monosaccharides. That is one molecule. And it is also maltose, lactose, and sucrose. Those are all disaccharides. That's it. When we talk about sugar, we're talking about those six compounds.
Mhm.
Now, there are enzymes in your intestine that will cleave the maltose into glucose and glucose. There's enzymes in the intestine that will cleave lactose into glucose and galactose. And there are enzymes in the intestine that will cleave sucrose into glucose and fructose. So ultimately, what you absorb is the monosaccharide,
Mhm.
glucose, galactose, fructose. So let's stick to those because ultimately those are the ones that matter. Now, glucose is the energy of life. Every cell on the planet burns glucose for energy. Glucose is so important that if you don't consume it, your body makes it.
Mhm.
So people on the ketogenic diet consume no glucose. They still have a serum glucose level. And they need a serum glucose level because the brain runs on glucose, other parts of the body run on glucose. They also run on ketones, but you have to build up the capacity to metabolize the ketones before you can do that. Bottom line is glucose is the energy of life. Every cell burns glucose for energy. Now, glucose has some downsides. Like, for instance, if your glucose spikes straight up, you will release a lot of insulin. That's bad. In addition, that glucose spike can change endothelial functionality and contribute to hypertension and other um, uh, problems, including uh, um, cardiovascular disease. So it's not like glucose is benign,
Mhm.
but mostly glucose is stable and you need it. You just don't have to eat it because your body will make it.
Mhm.
So people who are on the ketogenic diet, they still have glucose. They just don't consume it.
Mhm.
They have it, but they don't consume it. And you can make glucose from amino acids. You can make glucose from fats. Okay, now let's go to galactose. Galactose is what's in milk sugar. Now, do you need galactose? And the answer is when you're 3 years old or under, you need galactose. Okay, not after, but until age 3, you need galactose. And the reason you need galactose is because galactose is necessary to make certain neurolipids called galactocerebrosides. Okay? And they also help with the immune system. They are part of the haptenes that sit on top of immune cells. So you need galactose too. Uh, Now, why you only need it till age 3 and not after is because your body can make galactose when it needs to after that. But until then, galactose is essential as well. And of course, with lactose-free formulas, babies are not getting the galactose that they need. All right. And finally, the last one, the big kahuna, the king of the hill, if you will, fructose. So fructose is not galactose and it is not glucose. Fructose is what's sweet in fruit sugar. Fructose is um, uh, uh, addictive. You crave it, you want it, you can't stop eating it. It activates the reward center of the brain. It drives hunger, it drives craving, it drives addiction. Okay, and we have all the data on, to support all of that, both from neuroimaging and from biochemical and from epidemiological standards. The question is, do you need fructose? There is not one biochemical reaction in any eukaryotic or animal cell on the planet that requires dietary fructose. It is completely vestigial to all vertebrate life on this planet. It is completely unnecessary, yet we are awash in it. And it's addictive. And worse yet, it actually inhibits mitochondrial ATP generation. It causes your mitochondria to work less well. It inhibits three separate enzymes that are necessary for normal mitochondria to function. It inhibits AMP kinase, the fuel gauge on the liver cell. It inhibits ACAD-L, acyl-CoA dehydrogenase long chain, necessary to burn fatty acids into two carbon fragments. And finally, it inhibits CPT1, carnitine, palmitoyl transferase 1, the necessary that regenerates carnitine, which is necessary to burn those fatty acids for ATP in the first place. Bottom line, fructose is a mitochondrial toxin. Now, it's everywhere. It's sweet. It's what our plant ancestors used for energy, but it is not what we use for energy. Now, the food industry will tell you that fructose is ready energy. Hardly. Fructose actually depletes your energy. And that's one of the big myths that has to be rethought. Now, one of the reasons they say that fructose depletes your energy is if you are a football player or a soccer player on the pitch, on the gridiron, and you've been running around for 3 hours at a time, and you are glycogen depleted, if you consume some fructose, say in the form of Gatorade,
Mm-hmm.
that fructose, there's a backdoor pathway that will actually make glycogen. So you can replete your glycogen from fructose. That is true. And so if you're a sports enthusiast or an athlete, fructose can help you replete your glycogen faster. And that can be good. So there is a potential value to sports drinks containing fructose for people who are glycogen depleted, but only for people who are glycogen depleted. If you are not glycogen depleted, you don't do that. And what happens instead is that the fructose goes from inside the cell, gets imported into the cell, goes straight down to the mitochondria. The mitochondria become overwhelmed, can't handle the onslaught of that extra energy, and it throws it off as citrate, and that citrate then gets turned into fat. And now your liver is taking sugar and turning it into fat. This is a process called de novo lipogenesis, new
Mm-hmm.
fat making. Now, that fat may make it out of the liver cell, in which case now you have hypertriglyceridemia. You have
Mm-hmm.
triglycerides floating around in your bloodstream, which can contribute to heart disease or obesity. Or it won't make it out of the liver, in which case now it's precipitated as a lipid droplet, and now you have fatty liver disease. And 25% of children in America, not obese children, all children in America now have fatty liver disease.
Yeah.
This is a disease we'd never seen before 1980.
Mm-hmm.
It was non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. If you had fat in your liver, you were an alcoholic. But kids don't drink alcohol. But 25% of them have fatty liver. And the reason is because the fructose is metabolized in the liver virtually identically to that of alcohol. And therefore, we see children now getting all the diseases that we attribute to alcohol, like type 2 diabetes and fatty liver disease, because sugar is the alcohol of the child. And that's what we give them at breakfast. So this is the problem.
And when you say fructose, is it the same as high fructose corn syrup, or there is difference between the two, what the food industry are adding?
So depends on where you are in the world. High fructose corn syrup is something we have here in the United States. They have it in Japan, and they have very limited exposure in certain parts of Europe. For the most part, high fructose corn syrup is not in Asia. It is, not around the Pacific Rim. Australia doesn't have it. I don't believe the Middle East has it. This is something exclusive to us. The question is it worse? And the answer is the studies that have been done pitting high fructose corn syrup against sucrose show no material difference. They are in effect the same. And the reason is because the enzyme in your intestine that cleaves the sucrose into the two molecules, glucose and fructose, once it does that, then high fructose corn syrup and sucrose are the same once the two molecules get cleaved apart. And that happens in about a nanosecond. So it shouldn't surprise anyone that there are no material physiologic differences between sucrose or table sugar and high fructose corn syrup. The problem with high fructose corn syrup is not because it's metabolically worse than sucrose. The problem with high fructose corn syrup is that it's cheaper than sucrose. And because it's cheaper, the food industry had carte blanche to put any amount in any food they wanted. Also, because it's liquid, because the two molecules are already separated, they're all free,
Unbound.
it's much higher solubility. So they can use a much higher concentration and it won't precipitate out. It won't, crystallize out. Okay. Have you ever had a cookie that had too much sugar when it was baked? It can sort of taste some kind of gritty.
Mhm.
Okay. But when you make a cookie with high fructose corn syrup, like Chips Ahoy, okay, and it becomes a chewy cookie, I mean, you can sell it as that. And that's actually becomes a feature, not a bug. And so it's not that high fructose corn syrup is metabolically worse. It's that it's economically worse
Mhm.
because it's cheaper.
Okay, so just to give a background, fructose is a simple sugar and it's found a lot in fruit and honey. And of course, honey is revered in the Middle East. But I have to say that the major source of fructose is not from fruit and honey, but rather from table sugar. So table sugar or sucrose consists of two sugars. One is fructose and one is glucose. There's also a sweetener that's used in many parts of the world called high fructose corn syrup, and it's a mixture of fructose and glucose in a liquid form. And it usually has fructose sort of dominating. It's a little bit more than the glucose in the mixture, at least for drinks. And high fructose corn syrup is used in a lot of soft drinks, for example. And fructose is, the major source comes from these added sugars, table sugar and high fructose corn syrup. So I would say that when you talk about fructose, it isn't just talking about fruits and honey, but it's also talking about sugar intake. So a lot of people equate fructose intake in the big picture with sugar intake. And sugar and fructose are strongly associated with metabolic syndrome. Uh, there's a very strong relationship between sugar intake, for example, and the risk for insulin resistance, for diabetes, for hypertension, for fatty liver, for chronic kidney disease, and most of the metabolic diseases. Insulin resistance and is probably one of the strongest. So our group has actually studied the role of fructose in experimental animals, in nature, in evolution, in human studies, and we've become convinced that fructose has a major role in all of these metabolic diseases, even diseases like Alzheimer's. And what we've really discovered is that although the major source of fructose is sugar and high fructose corn syrup in most parts of the world, the body can make fructose as well, and it can make fructose from carbohydrates. So really, it's from glucose, which is the main. It's really the main sugar in most carbohydrates. Glucose, when it builds up in your system, if you eat a lot of foods rich in glucose, what we call high glycemic foods, that also generates fructose. So, it turns out that in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, and one of the major issues is not so much the sugar, but often honey is added to pastries, and the pastries are high glycemic carbs that basically bread that releases glucose at high levels, which then gets converted to fructose, and that whole combination is quite significant. And it's I've been to Kuwait and Qatar and Dubai, and it's some of the best food I've ever, sweetest, wonderful desserts. But I would say that a lot of those are ammunition for developing insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. So that's a long answer, about fructose. But it's important to realize it's not just what's in fruit and honey. It's really a bigger picture. It's sugar, it's breads, it's carbohydrates, and so it really is synonymous with high carb diets, high carbohydrate diets.
Do you tell your patient to monitor their net carbs or their total carbs? And what's the difference between the two for someone who doesn't know?
Yeah, well, on the list that I give out, you don't even have to count carbs.
Mhm.
So the list will automatically keep you under the 20 total carbs for the day. So I kind of discourage the use of apps and counting of carbs. Just stay to the list. And, I find my job is to make it simple, not hard for people to do. The idea of net carbs, so total carbs, meaning you count every carbohydrate in the food. You look on the label where it says total carbohydrate. You use the total, although in some countries they put glycated carbohydrate, meaning they've already subtracted out the fiber. Net carbs is where you subtract out the fiber and you subtract out the sugar alcohols from the total. So you might have a slice of bread that has 15 total, but you subtract out 8 for the fiber and maybe 2 for any other kinds of sugar alcohols or sweetener. And so the net carb would be 5. In fact, we're seeing now products where they market them as net carbs of 0. So, but on the label it says, carbs 0. Well, you have to look at the fine print. It says net. So look on the label. Some of these 0 net carb breads, pastas, ice creams are actually like 10 or 15 total carbs. And so the reason that's important to know the difference is some people, those net carb, the things you're subtracting out actually do impact the metabolism. I mean, you can now know with a glucose monitor or a CGM glucose monitor on your arm, you can test these things. And someone came to my office recently, and I'm in a clinical practice, 4 days a week, 4 work days, and someone said, well, what about this new candy? I said, well, I don't know. Well, look, it says total carbs and then net carbs. And I said, well, have you tried it? And he said, no. And well, so we went online in the office and someone was YouTubing their own result of the candy, and the first one we saw was no effect of the candy. So using net carbs, it didn't raise the blood glucose. So I was, trying to teach this person, well, it could be that the insulin went up to keep the glucose down. We don't know. They didn't measure the insulin. So we checked another few people who had done it online, and someone ate that same candy, and the blood sugar went from 100 to 180. So what we're learning is that there are individual, well, there are individuals differences. We're not all the same. And so you could use these net carb things. But again, my perspective is I want it to work the first time, every time. I'm in an office where people have waited often for months to come see me. And I ask, do you want to play around, see if it works or doesn't work? And they say, no, I want it to work the first time, every time. That's okay, then let's use total carbs, 20 to 30 per day. Let's not mess around with net carbs.
Yes.